The night was unusually quiet in the small town of Riverbrook. Officer James Reeves checked his watch, just one more hour until his shift ended. His patrol car headlights cut through the fog as he drove slowly down empty streets. After 15 years on the force, he knew every corner of this town, every shortcut and hideaway. Tonight felt different somehow. The radio beside him had been mostly silent, which usually meant a peaceful night, but James had learned to trust his gut, and something felt off. The crackle of the radio broke the silence. Unit 27, we've got an anonymous tip about strange noises at the old Carson warehouse on Elm Street. Caller thinks it might be kids causing trouble. Can you check it out? Copy that, James replied, turning his car toward the industrial area on the edge of town. The warehouse had been abandoned for years, a common spot for teenagers to hang out or homeless folks to find shelter during cold nights. As he pulled up to the warehouse, he noticed there were no other cars around. Strange for teenagers, who usually had at least one beat-up car among them. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped out into the chilly night air. "Police officer," he called out as he approached the rusted side door that hung slightly ajar. No response came back. He pushed the door open with a loud creak that echoed through the empty building. The beam of his flashlight bounced off dusty concrete floors and graffiti-covered walls. Empty beer cans and old newspapers littered the ground. Nothing unusual so far. "Anyone here?" His voice bounced back at him from the empty walls. Then he heard it, a small whimper from the far corner of the warehouse. He moved his flashlight beam toward the sound and caught a glimpse of movement behind some old wooden pallets. "Hello," he called, softer this time. "I'm not here to cause trouble. Are you okay back there?" As he approached, his heart nearly stopped. 3 small children huddled together in the corner. They were dirty, their clothes torn and much too thin for the cold weather. A white boy, maybe 40 years old, sat with his arms wrapped protectively around 2 little black girls who looked nearly identical, twins, probably around 3 years old. The boy's eyes were wide with fear, but there was something else there too. Determination. He pulled the twins closer as James approached. "Hey there," James said gently, crouching down to their level but keeping some distance to avoid scaring them further. "My name is Officer Reeves, but you can call me James. Are you hurt?" None of the children spoke. The boy just stared at him, unblinking. "It's okay. You're safe now," James continued, keeping his voice steady despite the anger and sadness building inside him. Who would leave 3 small children alone in an abandoned building? "Are you hungry?" "I've got some snacks in my car." At the mention of food, the boy's expression changed slightly. One of the twins peeked out from behind his arm. "I'm going to call for some help, okay? Then we'll get you something to eat and find somewhere warm for you to sleep tonight." James slowly reached for his radio, careful not to make any sudden movements. "Dispatch, this is Unit 27. I need medical assistance and social services at the Carson warehouse. I've found 3 young children abandoned. They appear malnourished but no visible injuries." "Copy that, Unit 27. Help is on the way, ETA 15 minutes." James put the radio down and looked back at the children. "Help is coming. Can you tell me your names?" The boy whispered something too soft to hear. "What was that?" James leaned in slightly. "Ethan," the boy whispered, his voice rough as if he hadn't used it in a while. "I'm Ethan. There's Dara and Amara." He nodded toward the twins. "How long have you been here, Ethan?" Ethan shrugged. 2 sleeps, I think." James felt his throat tighten. 2 days in this cold, empty building with no food or proper shelter. "Was there someone with you? An adult?" Ethan's face hardened. "They left. Said they'd come back." His small hand reached up to brush a strand of hair from one of the twins' faces. "They always say that." In his 15 years as a police officer, James had seen a lot of heartbreaking things. But something about these 3 children, the way the boy protected the girls, the silent trust between them, struck him deeply. James shrugged off his jacket and gently placed it around all 3 children. "I'm not leaving you," he said quietly. "I promise." And somehow, as sirens wailed in the distance and the first light of dawn began to break through the warehouse windows, James knew his life had just changed forever. The bright lights of Riverbrook General Hospital made James squint as he walked down the hallway. His uniform was rumpled from his extended shift, but he couldn't bring himself to go home. Not yet. 3 pairs of small shoes sat on the chair beside him, worn sneakers for Ethan and tiny pink sandals for the twins. The nurses had given the children hospital gowns after their dirty clothes were taken as evidence. Dr. Chen emerged from the examination room, her face tight with concern. "Officer Reeves, can I speak with you a moment?" James followed her a few steps away. "How are they?" "Physically, they're suffering from malnutrition and mild dehydration. The boy has some old bruises on his back and arms. The girls have minor skin infections that we're treating." Dr. Chen sighed deeply. "But considering what they've likely been through, they're remarkably resilient." "And mentally?" James asked, though he dreaded the answer. "It's too soon to tell. They're withdrawn, especially the girls. But the boy, Ethan, he's protective of them. Won't let them out of his sight. Screamed when a nurse tried to take one of the twins for an X-ray without him. She looked at James with tired eyes. What kind of situation were they in?" James shook his head. "Don't know yet. Found them in an abandoned warehouse. Ethan said they've been there for 2 days, but they've clearly been neglected for much longer." A woman in a gray pantsuit approached them, her badge identifying her as Valerie Torres from Child Protective Services. "Officer Reeves, I'm handling the children's case." She extended her hand. James shook it firmly. "What happens next?" "We're looking for emergency placement. Given their condition, we'd prefer to keep them together, but finding a foster home willing to take 3 traumatized children on short notice is nearly impossible," James finished for her. "Exactly." Valerie frowned at her clipboard. "The system is already overwhelmed. We might have to separate them temporarily." James felt something twist in his chest as he remembered how Ethan had held the twins close in that dark warehouse. "They shouldn't be separated." Valerie raised an eyebrow. "I agree, but options are limited." The words left James's mouth before he fully processed what he was saying. "I could take them." Both women stared at him. "You're offering to foster them?" Valerie asked. James hadn't planned this. He lived alone in a small 2-bedroom house. He worked long hours. He'd never even considered being a parent. But something about these children pulled at him. "I'm certified for emergency placement. Did the training 3 years ago when the department pushed for more officers to get certified." He ran a hand through his hair. "I have the space. I can take some personal time." Valerie looked skeptical. "All 3. "All 3, James confirmed, surprising himself with how certain he felt. After more discussion and paperwork than James had expected, he was allowed back into the room where the children were. Ethan sat on the hospital bed with a twin on each side. All 3 had clean faces now, their hair still damp from baths. They looked up as he entered. "Hi there," James said gently. "Remember me?" "Officer Reeves from last night." Ethan nodded slowly, his arm still around one of the twins. James pulled up a chair. "The doctors said you were doing okay. That's good news." "When do we have to go?" Ethan asked quietly. "Go where?" "To the next place." His small voice sounded too knowing, too resigned for a child so young. James leaned forward. "Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. How would you 3 feel about coming to stay at my house for a while?" The twins looked at Ethan, waiting for his response. He studied James with eyes that seemed much older than 4 years. "All of us together?" "All of you together," James confirmed. "Is it far?" Ethan asked. "About 20 minutes from here. I have a small house with a yard. There's a park nearby." One of the twins, James wasn't sure yet which was Zora and which was Amara, whispered something to Ethan. He whispered back before looking at James again. "Do you have a dog?" Ethan asked, the first hint of childlike interest creeping into his voice. James smiled. "No, but I like dogs. Do you?" For the first time, James saw a tiny smile flicker across Ethan's face. "I like big dogs," he said. "The girls like small dogs." As simple as that exchange was, it felt like a breakthrough. James spent the next hour sitting with them, mostly letting Ethan talk when he wanted to, not pushing when he didn't. The twins remained silent, but they watched everything with alert eyes. Later that afternoon, with car seats hastily purchased and installed, and a bag of donated clothes and essentials in the trunk, James drove slowly toward his house. Three small faces looked out the windows as familiar streets gave way to the quiet neighborhood James called home. "That's it," he said, pulling into the driveway of a modest blue house. "That's where I live." "Where we live," Ethan corrected softly from the backseat. "For now." "For now," James agreed, catching the boy's eyes in the rearview mirror. What had started as a routine call at the end of his shift had somehow led him here. As he helped the children out of the car, James wondered what he had gotten himself into, and how three tiny strangers had so quickly become his responsibility. James woke to the sound of screaming. He jumped out of bed and raced down the hallway to the spare bedroom, where all three children had insisted on sleeping together. Ethan was sitting upright, his small body shaking, tears streaming down his face. The twins were awake too, their eyes wide with fear. Hey, it's okay," James said softly, approaching slowly. 3 weeks had passed since he brought the children home, and nightmares were a common occurrence. "You're safe, Ethan. You're at my house, remember?" Ethan's breathing was rapid and shallow. "They took them," he whispered. "They took my sisters." James sat on the edge of the bed. "Your sisters are right here." He gestured to the twins who were now huddled against each other. "See, Zara and Amara are safe." Ethan looked at the twins, then back at James. Slowly, his breathing steadied. I thought they took them away again." Again. That word caught James's attention. "Who took them away before, Ethan?" But Ethan just shook his head and lay back down, pulling the blanket tight around him. The twins immediately snuggled closer to him. James sighed. "Would you like some water? Or maybe some hot chocolate?" At the mention of hot chocolate, all three heads perked up slightly. It had become their nighttime ritual after bad dreams. In the kitchen, as James heated milk on the stove, he watched the children sitting quietly at his table. They'd gained a little weight since coming to live with him. Their faces were less hollow, their eyes a bit brighter. But they still moved like shadows sometimes, especially the twins. "Here we go," he said, placing 3 mugs of hot chocolate on the table. "Careful, it's hot." As they sipped their drinks, James decided to try again. "Ethan, can you tell me about your sisters? Have you always been together?" Ethan's small fingers tightened around his mug. "Not always, but for a long time." "Are Zara and Amara really your sisters?" James asked gently. Ethan's face hardened with determination. "Yes, they're my sisters." "But you don't look alike," James pointed out carefully. "Doesn't matter," Ethan said firmly. "I take care of them. That makes them my sisters." James nodded, accepting this for now. "And before the warehouse, where did you live?" "Lots of places." Ethan took another sip of his chocolate, "with different people." "Were these people nice to you?" Ethan shrugged. "Some were okay, most were mean." He glanced at the twins. "They were meaner to the girls." James felt his jaw tighten but kept his expression neutral. "How did you end up at the warehouse?" "The last lady got mad because Amara was sick and crying all night. She said we were too much trouble." Ethan's voice was matter-of-fact, as if being abandoned was simply a normal part of life. "She drove us to that big empty building and said to wait inside. Said she'd come back when she wasn't so angry anymore." One of the twins, Zara, James thought, reached out and touched Ethan's arm. They seemed to communicate without words. "Have you always taken care of Zara and Amara?" James asked. Ethan nodded. "Since they were babies. They don't talk much because the mean people didn't like noise." James's heart ached. He'd seen many cases of neglect in his career, but sitting across from these 3 children, who had somehow formed their own family in the midst of chaos, hit differently. "Do you remember your parents, Ethan? Your real mom or dad?" Something flickered across Ethan's face, a flash of memory, perhaps. "I remember my mom had yellow hair like mine." And she sang to me. His voice grew quieter. Then there was a loud noise and people in masks came. After that, everything was different. The twins were watching Ethan intently as he spoke, as if hearing this story for the first time themselves. "And what about Zara and Amara's parents? Do you know anything about them?" Ethan shook his head. "They were just babies when I met them, really small. Someone had to feed them with special bottles." Dr. Reynolds, the child psychologist who visited twice a week, had warned James not to push too hard for information. Trauma had a way of burying memories, especially in children so young. But each little detail helped build a picture of what these kids had endured. After finishing their hot chocolate, James walked them back to their room. As he tucked them in, Amara, who had yet to speak a single word, reached out and touched his hand. Her tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb. The simple gesture made his throat tight with emotion. "I'll be right down the hall if you need me," he said. "Try to get some sleep." In the doorway, he paused and looked back at the 3 small figures in the bed. Somehow, in just 3 weeks, his quiet, orderly life had transformed completely. And though he had 1,000 questions about where these children came from, one thing was becoming increasingly clear. He would do whatever it took to keep them safe. As he headed back to his own room, James made a decision. Tomorrow, he would begin a proper investigation into their past. The police station hummed with activity as James sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen. He'd taken a week of personal leave to help the children settle in, but now he was back on duty and using every spare minute to dig into their past. "You look like you haven't slept in days," said Officer Diane Lopez, placing a cup of coffee on his desk. James rubbed his eyes. "Thanks. And yeah, between night shifts and 3 kids with nightmares, sleep is a luxury." Diane pulled up a chair. "How are they doing?" "Better, I think. Ethan started kindergarten yesterday. Half days for now. The twins are still too withdrawn for preschool, but they've stopped hiding when I enter a room, so that's progress. And this investigation you're running off the books?" She lowered her voice. "Find anything?" James glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "Maybe. I got the DNA results back from the lab." He'd called in a favor from a friend at the state crime lab, collecting samples from the children's toothbrushes and having them run through various databases. "I ran Ethan's DNA through the missing persons database," James continued. "Got a hit on a case from 2 years ago. A home invasion in Hartford, about 40 miles from here. Thomas and Catherine Wilson, both killed. Their son, age 2 at the time, disappeared." Diane's eyes widened. "You think Ethan is their son?" "The DNA is a match. Ethan Wilson." James pulled up a file on his computer. "Blonde hair, blue eyes. Reported missing October 12th, 2 years ago." "Poor kid," Diane whispered. "Does he remember any of it?" "He mentioned loud noises and people in masks, and a mother with yellow hair who sang to him." James sipped his coffee. The case went cold. No suspects were ever arrested. "What about the twins?" James frowned. "That's where it gets weird. Their DNA isn't in any missing persons database. No reports of twin girls their age gone missing anywhere in the state. So no one was looking for them. That's disturbing. Even more disturbing," James continued, "is that I ran their DNA through the familial match database. You know, the one we use to identify John Does when we have no other leads." Diane nodded. "Got a hit. A partial familial match to a man named Roland Jefferson." Diane nearly choked on her coffee. Roland Jefferson. The Roland Jefferson, owner of Jefferson Real Estate Group. James nodded grimly. "The very same. Multimillionaire on the city council, donates to the police charity ball every year. Why would his DNA be in the system? DUI charge about 10 years ago. Got community service, but they still took his DNA." James lowered his voice further. "The match suggests he could be the twins' father or uncle. Has Jefferson ever reported any missing children?" "Never. No record of him having children at all." James tapped his pen against the desk. "But the DNA doesn't lie. He's related to them." Diane leaned back in her chair. "What are you thinking? That Jefferson had secret kids that somehow ended up abandoned with Ethan Wilson?" "I don't know." James ran a hand through his hair. "But I intend to find out." The sound of his phone ringing interrupted their conversation. It was Mrs. Chen, Ethan's kindergarten teacher. "Officer Reeves, I think you need to come to the school. There's been an incident with Ethan." 20 minutes later, James was sitting in a small office at Riverbrook Elementary. Ethan sat beside him, staring at the floor. "He had a complete meltdown during story time," Mrs. Chen explained. "We were reading a book about families, and he became very upset, started screaming that the story was wrong, that families don't stay together." James put a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder. "What happened, buddy?" Ethan kept his eyes down. "The book was stupid. It said mummies and daddies take care of kids forever. That's a lie. James felt his heart break a little. Sometimes bad things happen to good families, Ethan. It's not how it's supposed to be. Are you going to send me away now? Ethan whispered. What? No, why would you think that? The lady before said bad boys get sent away. I was bad today. James knelt in front of Ethan. Listen to me. You're not bad. You got upset, and that's okay. And I'm not sending you anywhere. We're going home now, and we'll talk more there, okay? On the drive home, with Ethan buckled safely in the back seat, James made a decision. He needed to know more about Roland Jefferson and his possible connection to the twins. But he'd have to be careful. Jefferson was powerful, with friends in high places, including the police department. As they pulled into the driveway, James spotted Mrs. Puttle from next door playing with the twins in his small backyard. The girls were actually smiling as they took turns going down a small slide. Watching Ethan run to join his sisters, James felt a fierce protectiveness wash over him. These children had already been through so much. He wouldn't let anything, or anyone, hurt them again, no matter how powerful their enemies might be. Rain pounded against the windows as James sat in his car outside the gleaming Jefferson Real Estate Group headquarters. The 20-story building stood like a monument to wealth and power in the center of downtown. James checked his watch, 6:15 p.m. According to the receptionist he casually questioned yesterday, Roland Jefferson usually left work around 6:30. His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Puttle. Children had dinner. All good. Take your time. The kindly widow next door had become an unexpected blessing, offering to watch the kids whenever James needed to work. The twins had taken to her immediately, especially after discovering she baked cookies almost daily. Movement at the building's entrance caught his attention. A tall man in an expensive suit emerged, flanked by 2 security guards. Roland Jefferson. James had seen him in newspaper photos and at charity events, but never up close. He started his car and followed at a distance as Jefferson's black luxury car pulled into traffic. Instead of heading toward the wealthy lakeside neighborhood where Jefferson lived, the car turned toward the industrial district. Strange. James maintained his distance, grateful for the rain that provided extra cover. Jefferson's car finally stopped outside a nondescript warehouse. Unlike the abandoned building where James had found the children, this one appeared operational, with security cameras and a newly paved parking lot. Jefferson entered using a keycard, his security detail waiting outside. James parked a block away and approached on foot, keeping to the shadows. Through a small side window, he could see Jefferson talking to a man in a lab coat. Behind them were what looked like hospital beds, medical equipment, and locked cabinets. He snapped a few photos with his phone, then retreated to his car. Something wasn't right. Why would a real estate mogul have access to what looked like a private medical facility in an industrial zone? Back at the station the next morning, James found Diane at her desk. "Need a favor," he said quietly. "Can you run a property search on this address?" He slid her a piece of paper. 20 minutes later, she returned with a puzzled expression. The warehouse is owned by a company called Pinnacle Health Solutions, but here's the weird part. Pinnacle is a subsidiary of another company, which is owned by another company, and guess who's at the top of this corporate maze? Roland Jefferson, James guessed. Bingo. And it gets better. Pinnacle Health has no website, no business registration for healthcare services. But they've imported nearly $500,000 of medical equipment in the past 3 years. A chill ran down James's spine. "I need to dig deeper." "Be careful," Diane warned. "I heard the chief playing golf with Jefferson last weekend. Whatever you're onto, keep it quiet." That evening, after putting the children to bed, James sat at his kitchen table surrounded by papers and his laptop. He'd spent hours researching Jefferson, finding nothing suspicious in his public record. Wealthy, divorced twice, no children. Politically connected. Generous donor to children's charities, ironically. A soft noise made him look up. Amara stood in the doorway in her pink pajamas. "Hey there," he said gently. "Can't sleep." To his surprise, she walked over and climbed onto his lap, the first time she'd initiated physical contact. She pointed at a photograph on his laptop screen. "You know him?" James asked, shocked. Amara nodded, her small face suddenly fearful. "Bad man," she whispered, the first words James had ever heard her speak. James's heart raced. "The bad man in the picture? You've seen him before?" She nodded again, then buried her face against his chest. The sound of small footsteps announced Ethan's arrival. "She's talking," he said, eyes wide. "Yes," James said carefully. "She knows this man in the picture." Ethan came closer, looking at the screen. His face paled. "That's the man who took the babies." "What babies, Ethan?" "Lots of babies." Ethan's voice was barely audible. "Where they kept us, before." James felt cold dread settling in his stomach. "There were other children, where you were kept." Ethan nodded. "In a room with beds, the people wore white coats. They took blood a lot." He rubbed his arm unconsciously. "They took babies away. Some didn't come back." James struggled to keep his voice calm despite the horror rising within him. "And this man, he was there?" "Sometimes he looked at the babies, picked which ones to take." Amara was trembling now. Zora appeared in the doorway, as if sensing her twin's distress. "It's okay," James assured them, though he felt anything but okay. "You're safe now. No one's going to take you away." But even as he said the words, he realized the danger might be greater than he'd imagined. If Roland Jefferson was involved in something illegal involving children, something that might explain why the twins were related to him, then James had just made a very powerful enemy. As the children finally fell asleep in his bed that night, James made a call to the one person he thought might help, FBI agent Lucia Torres, who specialized in human trafficking cases. What the children had described sounded disturbingly like some kind of trafficking operation, possibly even illegal adoption or something worse. "It's James Reeves," he said when she answered. "I need your help with something off the books. It involves children, possible trafficking, and one of the most powerful men in the city." The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and cameras. James adjusted his tie nervously as he stood beside FBI agent Lucia Torres. 3 months had passed since their first meeting, 3 months of careful investigation, gathering evidence, and building a case that had shocked the entire city. "Ready for this?" Lucia asked quietly. James nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." Inside, the courtroom was packed. At the defendant's table sat Roland Jefferson in an expensive suit, flanked by 3 high-priced lawyers. He didn't look like a monster, more like a distinguished businessman having a minor legal inconvenience. The thought made James's blood boil. He spotted Diane in the gallery, giving him a thumbs up. She had been instrumental in the investigation, using her computer skills to follow money trails and communications that ultimately linked Jefferson to a network spanning 3 states. The judge entered, and everyone rose. James had testified in court many times before, but never in a case this big, never with so much at stake. When he was called to the stand, he felt every eye in the room on him. He swore to tell the truth, then met Jefferson's cold stare head-on. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Helen Wan, approached. "Officer Reeves, please tell the court how you first became involved in this case." James described finding the children in the abandoned warehouse, his decision to become their foster parent, and the clues that led him to investigate further. His voice remained steady, even as he recounted Ethan's nightmares and Amara's first fearful words about the bad man. "And what did your investigation reveal about the defendant's activities?" Helen asked. Objection. Jefferson's lawyer jumped up. "Calls for speculation." "I'll rephrase," Helen said smoothly. "Officer Reeves, please describe the evidence you and Agent Torres discovered at the warehouse facility owned by the defendant." James took a deep breath. "We found medical equipment consistent with reproductive procedures. Records indicated that surrogates, mostly vulnerable women, often illegal immigrants or those with addiction issues, were being paid to carry pregnancies to term. DNA from some of these children matched wealthy clients across the country." He continued explaining how Jefferson had essentially been running a black market baby operation disguised as a fertility clinic. The wealthy paid enormous sums for babies with specific traits, often using their own genetic material combined with surrogates. "And the twins in your care? What did you discover about them?" "DNA tests confirmed that Roland Jefferson is their biological father," James said. "Records indicate their mother was a woman named Grace Phillips who died during childbirth. No living relatives could be found." "And the boy, Ethan?" Ethan Wilson was kidnapped after his parents were murdered. According to the evidence we uncovered, he was initially taken to be sold through Jefferson's network. But he was considered too old and too recognizable from missing child reports. He was kept at one of the facilities where they housed surrogates and babies, essentially as free labor. He was taught to help care for the infants. Jefferson's face remained impassive throughout the testimony, but his knuckles were white as he gripped the table. Cross-examination was brutal. Jefferson's lawyer tried to paint James as an obsessed cop who had manufactured evidence to build a case against a prominent citizen. He suggested that James' attachment to the children had clouded his judgment. "Isn't it true," the defense attorney asked, "that you became emotionally involved with these children and were desperate to find someone to blame for their situation?" James met the lawyer's gaze steadily. "I became a foster parent to 3 traumatized children, yes. But the evidence against your client was gathered methodically, legally, and verified by multiple agencies. The FBI found 17 more children who were illegally trafficked through Mr. Jefferson's operation." After hours of testimony, James was finally excused. In the hallway, he checked his phone to find a text from Mrs. Patel with a photo of the children playing in the backyard. The sight of them smiling, looking almost like normal kids, gave him strength. Lucia joined him. "You did great in there. The jury was with you the whole time." "What happens now?" James asked. "Now we wait, but with the evidence we have, Jefferson is looking at decades in prison." She squeezed his shoulder. "What about the children? What happens with them?" James looked again at the photo on his phone. "Child Services did a home study last week. If everything goes well, I'm hoping to adopt them. All 3. Lucia smiled. "From the way those kids look at you, I'd say they've already decided you're their dad." As they walked out of the courthouse, pushing past reporters shouting questions, James thought about how much had changed in a few months. What had started as a routine call at the end of a shift had uncovered a criminal enterprise, brought down a powerful man who thought himself untouchable, and somehow given him the family he never knew he wanted. The fight wasn't over. The trial would continue for weeks, but for the first time, James truly believed that justice might be possible, even for the smallest and most forgotten victims. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the courthouse as James straightened Ethan's little blue tie. 1 year had passed since the trial began. Roland Jefferson had been sentenced to 30 years in prison. His operation had been dismantled, with several other arrests across 3 states. Today, however, was about something much more personal. "Are you nervous?" James asked, smoothing Ethan's hair. The boy shook his head. "No, are you?" James laughed. "A little bit." Across the room, Mrs. Patel was helping the twins with their matching yellow dresses. At 5 years old now, Zara and Amara were talking more, though still quiet around strangers. Their dark curls were tied with ribbons, and they kept looking at James with excited smiles. "All rise," called the bailiff as Judge Wilson entered the family court. This courtroom was smaller, warmer somehow, than the one where Jefferson had been tried. The judge, an older woman with kind eyes, smiled at the children. "Today we're here for a very happy occasion," she said, "the formal adoption of Ethan Wilson, Zara Jefferson, and Amara Jefferson by James Reeves." James felt a lump in his throat as the judge reviewed the paperwork. The past year had been challenging, helping the children heal from their trauma, testifying at multiple trials, dealing with the media attention that came with bringing down someone as prominent as Roland Jefferson. But through it all, their little family had grown stronger. "Officer Reeves," the judge said, "you've been these children's foster parent for over a year now. The home study reports are excellent. Is it your desire to become their legal and permanent father?" "Yes, Your Honor," James said, his voice steady despite the emotion he felt. "More than anything." "And Ethan," the judge said, looking at the boy, "you're old enough to have a say in this. Do you want Officer Reeves to be your dad?" Ethan looked up at James, then back at the judge. "He already is my dad," he said simply. "We just need the papers to make it official." Soft laughter filled the courtroom. Even the judge smiled. After a few more questions and signatures, the judge picked up her gavel. "By the power vested in me by the state, I hereby declare these adoptions final and complete. Congratulations to the new Reeves family." As they left the courtroom, Diane was waiting with a camera. "Family photo time," she called. James knelt down, gathering all three children in his arms as they smiled for the picture. He couldn't remember ever feeling this kind of happiness before. At the small celebration at their home later that afternoon, Agent Lucia arrived with a gift bag for each child and news about the case. "We've identified over 30 children who went through Jefferson's network," she told James quietly as they watched the kids playing in the yard. "Most have been reunited with biological family or placed with adoptive parents. But there's something else." She handed him a folder. "The DNA results you asked for. We ran expanded tests on all three children, looking for any possible biological connections." James opened the folder, scanning the report inside. His eyes widened. "This can't be right," he murmured. "We ran it twice to be sure," Lucia confirmed. "It appears that while Ethan isn't closely related to the twins, they do share a distant common ancestor. The connection goes back about 6 generations." James looked out at the children. Ethan was pushing the twins on the swings he had installed last summer, all three laughing. "How is that possible?" he asked. "We traced the lineage," Lucia explained. "During slavery times, Ethan's ancestors were plantation owners in Georgia. The twins' ancestors were enslaved on that same plantation. Historical records and DNA confirm there was a relationship between them, not uncommon in that terrible time." James watched the children playing, unaware of this complex history connecting them. "So they really are family, in a way, just like Ethan always insisted." "Life has a strange way of coming full circle," Lucia said. "Those children were brought together by terrible circumstances, but maybe there's something more at work too." Mrs. Patel called the children in for cake. As they ran inside, Zara and Amara racing ahead, while Ethan made sure they didn't fall, James thought about the unlikely journey that had brought them all together. A routine call at the end of a shift. 3 abandoned children. A criminal conspiracy. And now, a family bound not just by love and choice, but by threads of history neither he nor the children could have imagined. "Dad, come on, it's cake time," Ethan called from the doorway. James smiled, putting the folder aside. The past, with all its pain and connections, had shaped them, but today was about their future together. "Coming," he said, joining his children at the table where friends had gathered to celebrate the family that had been forged through darkness but now stood together in the light.